Alrighty, thank you again for everyone who has joined and welcome. We are very happy to being able to move this event online and provide an opportunity for young professionals to get advice on potential career areas and any tips and hints moving into the world, the professional world. I would like to start the event with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge that I am moderating this event from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all connecting from and all the other Indigenous peoples of Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past and present. We join them in furthering the search to understand and care for our world. Now, to introduce our panelists, we have joining us this evening. We have Joshua Karras. He completed an undergraduate in vision science and then completed 3 master's degrees in international public health, health management, and public health, majoring in infectious disease control. He is currently the executive manager of the United Nations Association of Australia New South Wales branch. We then have Dr. Merriden Varrall. She's the director of the Australian Geopolitics Hub at Kpmg. She was previously the director of the Lowy Institute's East Asia program from 2014 to 2018 and has worked with the UN Development Programme, the Australian Government Treasury and the Department of Family and Community Services. Lastly, we have Thom Dixon, who is currently undertaking a PhD at Macquarie University, looking at emerging technology and international security. He is also the National Research Assessments Leader at Macquarie University. Each panelist will speak for approximately 15 minutes and we will then have half an hour or so for questions afterwards. During their talks, please feel free to post questions in the chat, the Q&A section below you can see on your screens. And they will then be read out by myself during the question time. Please make sure to include the panelists you would like to answer that particular question, or if there's multiple panelists you'd like to hear from, please let us know. And we will get started with the event. Now we'll have Joshua Karras speak a bit about his career.
Thanks, Nikki. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Yes, my name is Josh. I want to firstly also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting, the various lands. But it's a real pleasure to be speaking, and thank you once again for the invitation. So I'm coming from the angle, I think, of someone who is, more recent, just beginning their the professional trajectory. I graduated at the end of 2018, so I'm only a couple of years out of uni. But I think in this day and age, time is, the opportunities, especially because of COVID, in this space, are exploding in new and interesting ways. And I think it's in some cases fast tracking what I thought it was something that would only be attainable in a few years' time. So, but I'll talk about that in a moment. As mentioned, so my undergraduate was actually in vision science. There was a time in my life where I entered the tertiary education thinking I was going to become an optometrist. So I loved it, and I loved the eye. I was just failing miserably at really critical components of what it is to be, what is needed in an optometrist. That meticulousness. I would look into a test patient's eyes. Yep, all clear. And I'll never forget my supervisor saying, "No, this patient has macular degeneration, glaucoma, and glaucoma." And I just thought, this is an issue. This is not a good thing. It was a realization that, I've got some strength, but I've got some really notable weaknesses, and I need to work with them and leverage, what I've got to offer with what I want to do. So it was a tough kind of few months of coming to the end of my degree, realizing I should not enroll in a postgraduate degree of a master's of optometry. I should probably get out with my base, undergraduate degree of vision science, because I love, the scientific method, and I love the eye. I love health. So what do I do without, primary healthcare was the way that I saw myself moving forward. It took a highly unusual and coincidental rendezvous with the ambassador of Venezuela in Canberra. It's a ridiculous story of me bumping into him. Long story short, I had the chance to meet with him at the embassy, and that was a real turning point for me. It opened my eyes, meeting him and asking him to take me in as a mentee. Really opened my eyes just to the world of international relations, diplomacy, cooperation, all of that. And it actually reawakened, I suppose, a lost interest of mine, that is international cooperation. I remember as a 6-year-old attending the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, and like I cried. I was only 6, and I never knew why I cried, and then until I came to the realization, I just really love it when countries actually do cool stuff together instead of fight. And so my eyes inexorably turned to the UN as I was completing the end of my undergraduate degree, and I thought, okay, what have I got in front of me? I've got a love of health. I've got a love of international relations. What can I do here? Through a bit of research, I came to understand and discover the Master of International Public Health. And that was the perfect marriage of my interests, both past and future. And I went for it. I enrolled in a combined Masters of International Public Health and a Masters of Health Management because I wanted to be a leader in the field. So I got that second Masters, and through a very lucky selection of subjects, I was able to complete a third Masters in a semester, which was in Infectious Disease Control. Little was I to know the relevance of that degree back in 2018. So it was that 2-year period where I was studying for those master's degrees, where I was consolidating and redefining my trajectory. That was very important for me. I realized I wanted to work for the UN. The UN is, what is the UN? It's a conglomerate. I was very late to the game. I was 23, so I was, and I hadn't really considered working internationally before. So I threw myself into the UN Society at UNSW, represented us at as the United States on the Security Council, which was very fun. And that really fast-tracked me understanding, the greater components of how the UN works, how it functions. It's all of that. During this time, in the second years of my master's studying, I realized I don't have any experience. So I typed in UN Sydney and researched what I was able to do, on a volunteer basis or on a part-time basis, just while I was, finishing up my studies to, make that CV shine, so to speak. I came across UNAA, the UN Association Australia, and for those who don't know, the UNAA NSW division is the preeminent institution that represents and promotes the works of the UN and its mission. So if the UN was a human body, we're the fingernail. We're right at the periphery, taking the message and mission of the UN to our community. So we're inward facing, we're community facing. I came across them, discovered them, immediately became a member, and then attended an event. So this is kind of just things that happen now, a bit of a timeline. I immediately, at that event, locked down a volunteer who was with them. I said, hello, I'd like to do things. And, through various back and forths and me being kind of persistent on LinkedIn with this poor individual, really trying to get in, he ended up being part of the marketing and communications team. I had zero experience. In fact, I'd say I have no interest in that space, in that it doesn't interest me, but I said, yep, I can do it. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and I became a member of the Marcoms team. It was just, I did whatever I needed to do just to get into the ranks, so to speak. From there, I was invited to attend an executive committee meeting where I was told not to say anything, you're a member, but you can't speak, whatnot. And I'm attending this very serious meeting. And they were running through the roles and responsibilities, and there was a vacancy for event lead for World Health Day. So someone to organize the event to be held on that, on World Health Day. And I think I blustered or something at that point. I don't remember what I did. and they, are you okay? You want to speak? And I said, sorry, I know I'm not supposed to speak, but I would really love that position. And I briefly told them my background in health, and I got it, and I got that volunteer position. From there, it was very quick. I was very quick to kind of then move on to become educations manager. So overseeing all of the educational programs that the association runs, before finally receiving a call out of the blue from the president offering me this position on an inaugural basis. There's no one that holds this position before me. So I'm the first executive manager for the association. We'd grown substantially in the year prior since from when I began volunteering. And so it was very much a right place, right time kind of situation. I was looking for full-time work. I had just graduated and I was very, very lucky. So that was how, that was kind of the trajectory. And I've held this position now for a year and a half. From, I suppose, that my duty today now involves me leading all events and programs that align with UN goals, as well as the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I love it immensely. It's what the SDGs are my favorite part of the UN at the moment. And it's been wonderful, but also horrific, unfortunately, this year to watch the SDGs kind of take a back seat, take a seat in the boot, then be left behind on the road because of COVID. So it's it's going to be a real decade of action for us to achieve those goals by the end of the decade. But I suppose going back to my trajectory here. So yeah, I've got as it's only been just a year and a half, 2 years since I graduated, I'm still figuring out what my trajectory is to be. There, I have a few decisions before me. There's I have a place to do a PhD ahead of me. If I wanted at UNSW, I can. There are some opportunities in the long term as to the next step that I take. So I'm still figuring that out myself. It's a bit of a time will tell situation, especially with COVID. But in taking, I suppose, extrapolating the lessons whenever I speak at these type of things that I always think and reflect is most important for me, at least, is the concept of researching. So as I mentioned, I typed in UN Sydney. I had no idea what was out there. And we're very fortunate to have at this day and age, literally everything at our fingertips. So digging in and finding out what is available to you and what is applicable to you is something that I think is completely underrated. I don't see a lot of individuals, volunteers that I work with, doing that enough. It's a very simple concept, but I think it can be real, add real value to kind of the concept of what do I do with myself. Volunteering is everything. So as I mentioned, I didn't have experience. I had been applying while I was doing my volunteering. I was applying for health-based jobs left, right, and center. And I was not getting them. Even with 3 master's degrees, it was nothing. It's all about experience. It's and as well as that, networking. It's a horrible truth about most industries, but network. Like I've already added most of the panelists on LinkedIn. It's something that I've come to learn is just a hard fact. You make connections, and you realize that the real change and the real capacity for movement is through these connections that you make with like-minded people. So that's a huge note that I would make as well. Saying yes, I've always considered myself to be a bit of a yes guy. It's very rare that I will say no to an opportunity that will in some way benefit me personally, socially, or professionally. So obviously there's a caveat to that. You have to take care of yourself, but if you can fit it into your schedule, make it happen. If you're offered something, take it up. It's once again, simple concept, but it works for me quite significantly. One that I would say is that I'm only just reflecting on recently. is the concept of remaining true to like your authentic self. So if you were to find me on Facebook, or you would see that my Facebook page, or my what's out there on the internet, is extremely, some would say unprofessional. I would like to say authentic. It's I have a performance streak in me, so I enjoy singing, dancing, doing musicals, that type of thing. I've combined that, since learning about the whole concept of international collaboration. I do silly things like create, take songs and rewrite the lyrics to reflect the policies of COVID, things like that. And I'm noticing just recently, literally in the last 3 months, that is what people are picking up on. I think they're noticing that, when individuals, the concept behind this is that when individuals want to send a message out to the world, it will be best received if the message is sent authentically. So that is probably the most important message that I would like to say is, remaining in your authentic self is something that will only, benefit you, and will present opportunities that you would not have, necessarily expect. That's something that I would definitely, I would say. Apart from that, yeah, that's probably all of the notes that I would think of are relevant to me. I'll happily take any questions as they come later on. But yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to share a bit of my story. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. It's great to hear that someone's still figuring it out despite all of the things that you've done, and kind of, you had an idea, you like, yes, international health or international relations and health, these are great, this is what I'm interested in, but like, you just never know what's going to happen. And yeah, you just really have to take it as it comes, especially nowadays. On Joshua's remark, don't forget to put some questions in the Q&A boxes below so that we can have some ready for when we get to the question time. I'd now like to invite Merriden to talk about her career. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. And thanks so much, Joshua, for those. They were really interesting stories. So I'm going to divide this into 3 sections. And Nikki, can you do that popping up thing when I'm hitting towards the end so I can make sure I stop on time, please? That would be very helpful. Thank you. All right. So the first section is how did I get here? The second section is tips. And the third section is what is it like where I am now? So how did I get here? So here's 3 tips, and I'll sort of try and weave the story, the narrative into the tips. The first tip that I would have is work hard. And my first notes here were work hard and don't be an asshole. Right across, and I wrote work hard and try not to be an asshole, because sometimes it's not easy. This is something, I think a lot of the time we imagine that working hard might not be recognized. I've found that working hard is recognized, and that particularly when you work hard, you do a good job, and you do it in such a way that is respectful of other people, and integrates well with other people and what they're trying to achieve as well. So not working hard at the expense of other people, but alongside other people. And in fact, when I had my interview for the Lowy Institute, one of the things that they said to me when I had that interview was, here we have a no dickhead policy. Can you demonstrate to us how you're not a dickhead? And that was unexpected. That's not usually a question that you get in an interview, but it was a really important one. And it led me to sort of really reflect on how does that work? And I think, to tell you the truth, there are a lot of times when there might be people who were better qualified than me for a job, smarter than me, could have done the job better, but they didn't get on so well with the people around them, or they demonstrated a certain kind of personality characteristic that people were wary of and didn't want to work with. So while being really good at what you do is one thing, being a person that other people want to work with is another really important element as well. The second tip on how did I get here, or the second point on how did I get here, exactly like the other 2 guys here, I did what I found interesting. So the thing that I find that I like most is learning new stuff and being interested in stuff. And I think sometimes, yes, I'm absolutely passionate about China. I spent years studying China, living in China, working on China. But when I don't work on China and I work on other things, I find that I'm really passionate about those too. And it took me a while to reconcile, am I just flippant and shallow and I have no true and profound learning interests, or am I just the sort of person who's interested in all new things? There are limits, there are some things, as I think Josh was talking about, that I reckon I couldn't do, and I have to be honest about those and realistic. But generally speaking, tip number 2, or the thing that worked for me on how I got here, was to do what I found interesting and I learned from. And the third tip, again, I think what Jeremy and Josh were saying, I had no grand strategies either. I just took opportunities as they came up. So, for example, Jeremy was talking about at uni, he took Spanish, seemed like fun. When I was choosing what I wanted to do at uni, I wanted to get into journalism, but the TER or the HSC mark at that time was higher than the mark that I got. And so I did a course in political science, basically, with the plan of getting a high enough average that I could transfer over. But I found political science so interesting, I stayed in political science. And then I found uni so interesting that I decided that I wanted to stay there as long as possible, and I really didn't want to get a job. So I did a double degree with honours, which ended up being a 6-year degree, because I just couldn't handle the idea of having to work full time. And I did this degree, and it was in international studies at UTS. And you have to choose a country to focus on and to major in, more or less. And I remember Mum going through the list of countries that you could choose. It was on a typewritten piece of paper in the olden days. And I said, look, there's Chile. That sounds exciting. Mum's like, no, that's too far away. And I said, Japan, that looks good. And she said, no, that's going to be a bit expensive. Look at the costs there. We can't probably afford that. And I said, China. And we thought, you know what? You've always really liked Chinese food, Merriden. That would be a good choice. And so we chose China. And by chance, that happened to become an incredibly thing in our world, and it was really fascinating and really interesting, and I really enjoyed learning about it and learning the language. So China it was. I do try to remember in professional settings that I should say something like, well, at the age of 18 I could see the emerging strategic importance of China on the geopolitical horizon, but frankly that's not true. So that was the third point. No grand strategies, taking opportunities. Again, when I finished university and was forced to get a job, I had one of these kinds of degrees. I wasn't an expert in anything. All I could do was think critically and analyze things. So, what was I going to do for a job? I joined the government in Canberra as well, and as in the graduate program, I went into family and community services, and I really loved that role and that department. That was all about, I worked in strategy, but I worked in demographic policy, I worked in strategic policy, and I worked in early childhood policy, so the prevention of neglect and abuse of children. And it was fascinating. All of those things were really, really interesting. They weren't about international studies, they weren't about China, which is what I'd done at university, but by the same token, they really set me up with a lot of really useful work skills. So I learned how to write clearly. I remember I was writing a lot of public service jargon, using a lot of kind of buzzwords and code words. And my boss took me aside and said, this is rubbish, stop writing like this. And she gave me a couple of books to read. She gave me George Orwell, and she gave me, God, I can't remember his name now, but another Australian, Don Watson, weasel words. And she said, this is what you're doing, stop it, write properly. And that was really a good guidance for me. So I learned how to write, I learned how to work in a team, I learned how to niche and deliver work, I learned how to manage timelines. So although it wasn't exactly what I'd been burning to do, it was amazingly useful, and I learnt a lot. From facts, what I found in facts was really quite a lot of insights about how government works, and that's useful, and how policy works, that's obviously useful. I found that what we were doing in facts, we were doing our very best to create evidence-based policy, but when our policy proposals go up to the central agencies like Treasury, these policies were being frozen out or turned down, and I couldn't understand why, because they, from our point of view, they were the best policies that we could come up with. So I decided I wanted to go to the centre and find out what was going on. So I got a job in Treasury to see, what are the processes there? What are the things that they're considering that is making this good policy disappear? Treasury was a different world for me. I don't come from an economic background, and there's a lot of context in Treasury. And for me, it wasn't a great fit because I really came from a critical theory way of looking at the world. And when you come from an economic theory way of looking at the world, there's a bit of a clash there. I found it really interesting. I found that I learned a lot, but it wasn't a good fit for my temperament or particularly, my learning direction, what I wanted in life. So then again, opportunities came up. I found out about a PhD scholarship. Wasn't anything I'd been particularly interested in. And then that led into a whole different world of things. I also got an opportunity to do now I don't think it exists anymore, the Youth Ambassador for Development program. So I did a 1-year program in Beijing, back into China, where I worked for the International Labour Organization for a year. And that was an incredible experience as well. We were working on a project to prevent the trafficking of girls and young women from rural areas of China into urban areas of China. So it was getting back into this place where international relations, or international policy and social policy, which was a really cool combination. And again, basically the stories are the same. Things came up, they sounded interesting, and I went for them. So that's the kind of story of how I got here. From China, then there was this kind of opportunity in the PhD, I ran out of funding. I needed to get some sort of extra funding. So there was a scholarship that you could get from this training that required you to do an internship where you were. So I looked for an internship. I had a friend who was an intern at the UN. Their internship was finishing up. They thought that would be a good one for me to do. So I got an internship at the United Nations Development Program in Beijing. And fortunately, it was something that was quite related to my PhD research. So I think, I was the oldest intern probably the UN had ever seen, but it was a great opportunity to find out how that worked. And what happened there, again, unplanned, but opportunities arose. So I got to get consultancy contracts, and then an opportunity for a full-time staff position became available. I applied for that, I got that position. And so I sort of worked my way up in that system. After a long time, and this is sort of reflects Jeremy's story as well, after a long time living and working overseas, I just wanted to come home. I just felt like I was going, if I stayed away any longer, I would be a rootless person, and that certainly suits some, but I wanted to put my roots down again. So that's when the Lower Institute job came up. And to be honest, I didn't think I would get it. I didn't think I stood a chance of getting that job. But I thought, well, what the hell, I'll apply for it. And once I'd proven that I wasn't a dickhead and a few other fundamentals, I was successful in that. And that's what brought me to Australia. From the Lower Institute, I've been there for 4 years. And to be honest, the way that China is discussed in Australia, and being the head of the East Asia program there and talking a lot about China, was starting to get difficult. I felt I wasn't learning anything anymore, and I was kind of repeating the same things over and over again, and I wanted to do something a bit different. So I approached Kpmg about geopolitics and the necessity of geopolitics for business, and that led into the position that I'm in now. So now I'm definitely finished. How did I get here? And the second thing I wanted to talk about was tips. And the first tip I have is don't wait for openings. And that Kpmg story, I think, segues into that. You should find where you want to go, and you should try and get yourself there. I think Josh talked about that a bit with the United Nations as well. I think until quite a long way into my career, I waited for openings to come up. And now I think, yes, of course, do that too. But if you know someone you want to work with, if you know there's a role somewhere, if you know there's an area that you want to work in, try and find a way into that space, and don't just hound people relentlessly, but try and get yourself known. Try and think of a way that you can show them what you can add to what they're doing, how you can be of value to them, and try and put yourself into that place. So that would be my first tip. My second tip actually kind of reflects as one of these questions that we've come up here. How can you master the networking without coming off as pushy? Is to find that really difficult balance between being confident and sure of your capabilities and your skills versus being smarmy or pushy. this is really hard. And it's a lot about knowing yourself honestly. And I think there are some in the population who have cracking overconfidence, and sometimes it's misplaced. And there are also many in the population who have imposter syndrome and don't really value their own capabilities and their own worth. And it's worth, I don't know, talking to a careers counsellor or a trusted friend or a mentor, really. And I think, again, Josh brought this up. What are your skills? What are you good at? And by the same token, what do you need to work on? And you need to know yourself, but you also need to know the audience that you're presenting to. Some people love a bit of pushy. Some people hate pushy. And it's really useful to be able to observe the person that you're talking to or the crowd that you're in. It's hard on Zoom because I can't see anybody, but to think about, who you're engaging with and what kind of person they are, and adjust accordingly. That seems maybe a bit contradictory to what Josh said about your true self and your authentic self. I, like Joshua, have a streak for the dramatic. I have found that it has helped me when I keep that more under wraps than allow it its full in a public place. So for me, authenticity is something that I keep for myself, to steer myself and to judge my moves. But I don't necessarily, I think for me, it's been more important to look at the audience and ensure that I'm playing to them in a way that is going to be valuable to them. That's the second one. And the third tip is always try to give your colleagues and your boss more than what they before they knew they wanted it, to the best standard you can, as if they weren't there to correct your work, as if they weren't there to check it over. Always imagine that there is no line between you and the outside world, and what you're giving your boss is the final product. So again, this is sort of the not being a dickhead thing as well, making yourself invaluable, making yourself useful, and showing that you care about this and you're thinking about it. But by the same token, getting something done is better than having something perfect that isn't handed in. So again, it's an issue of judgment. I see Nikki pop up, I'll wrap up. Very quickly, what's it like at Kpmg? The first thing that comes to mind is it's very different from previous jobs I've had, very different from academia, very different from the Law Institute, very different from the UN, and there is different languages, there's a different purpose, and that adjustment has been really challenging for me because it's such a shift away. But it's very varied. There are a lot of great opportunities, and I do get to learn and apply myself in all different directions. I will leave it there, but I'm really happy to talk more about that or anything else that you guys want to talk about later on. So thank you very much, Nikki. To you.
Great, thanks, Merriden. That was a lot of good tips, slightly different to what Joshua said, but as you mentioned, it's a judgment thing, and I think people need to figure it out a little bit in the moment, but still great advice. Now for our last panelist, Thom Dixon.
Hello, everyone. I am also going to take a similar approach to Merriden, which is picking out, I think, a few key lessons that I've learnt. I'm very much still in an early career stage, but I do wear a few hats. So I am the Vice President with the Australian Institute of International Affairs here in New South Wales. And I'm also a research fellow with an AI company called Remy AI. But neither of those are paid. They're volunteer positions. My paid work is actually working at Macquarie University, where I work in research management, and I'm the National Research Assessments Leader there. And that's a really long-winded title for essentially saying that we work to enable research excellence, engagement, and impact across all disciplines at the university. And this means that I get to work with all of the top tier professors across the university and see how their careers have worked and how they've achieved impact through their work and in their lives. And so I also want to take some lessons from what I've seen them do. I definitely haven't done these things. The first point I want to make is the importance of showing up. I joined the council of the AIIA here in New South Wales because a man named Michael Sutton, who was a councillor in 2014, approached me at the back of the room where I was a very shy individual and said, would you like to join the council? I will nominate you. We need someone young on the council. And I've never seen him since. He did that completely out of the blue, but he did it because I had showed up to every event at the Institute for a year and sat at the back and listened. And I can't emphasize enough how that single event has been instrumental in the path of my career. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't turned up. And so in terms of where you want to go in your career, I would say pick a place where all of the people that you want to become associate and turn up. The second point, and this kind of leads off that one, is opportunity kind of breeds itself. A few years later, I received a phone call out of the blue, and the executive director of the Institute had received another phone call from the person who runs Australian Council for Security Cooperation in Asia Pacific, which is a group at ANU. And they had received too much money from the Department of Defence, which is an incredible rarity. And they wanted to take someone to a conference in Malaysia. And through these various phone calls, it ended up being me. And again, the fact that I received that phone call and was able to go and talk to my boss and say, can I go? I've got a week's notice. Can I go for a week? That was instrumental again in my career. When I went to that conference in Malaysia, I was able to meet people and I joined essentially the Young Leaders group with the Pacific Forum, which I cannot recommend highly enough. They are a fantastic network to join. And if you would like to know more about them, please do get in contact with me afterwards. The third point that I wanted to make is the importance of taking once in a career opportunities. But after listening to Merriden, I really think this is the importance of making once in a career opportunities. Prior to my current job, I worked as a project officer for the Deputy Vice Chancellor Research at Macquarie. And part of that job involved basically triaging their emails. So I was reading the emails for over 5 years of a world leader in microbiology. It actually works in synthetic biology. And I was seeing the kind of stuff that was coming through. And I have no scientific background. My background's in international relations and communication. But I saw that this was transformative, that this particular thing was going to change the world. And so bit by bit, I asked him about it. I began to write things and ask him to look at them and edit them. And now he is my co-supervisor on my PhD, looking at the international relations of synthetic biology. He is a world leader. There are not many people in the world who do what he does. And the ability to take up that opportunity, it was a once in a career opportunity, and I had to make it. It did not exist. It took me 2 years to find someone in the Faculty of Arts who could even supervise the degree, because there's no one in that faculty that knows anything about synthetic biology. And so I guess out of that, I would say, don't be disheartened. But if you see something and you think the future's headed that way, you need to remain resilient and keep at it. The next point I'd make, and this one comes actually from working with a lot of academics, is around the importance of having a well-curated online presence. A lot of work we do, especially with early career researchers, is around them building their reputation. And today it is absolutely essential to have I'd say a curated online presence to do that. If you meet someone in the real, for instance, whether or not that still happens or will happen, the first thing they're going to do after they walk away, if you've given them a business card, is they're going to look you up. And so knowing what they will see when they look up the first 10 search results, that's a really important thing. So if ensuring you have a well-curated LinkedIn presence, any other social media that you're on, that's really important. And we say to our academics, we recommend that they create a separate professional social media profile. This doesn't work for everyone, but we suggest they do that so that their public-facing version of their self is one that is going to actually pull in opportunities rather than push them away. The next thing I'd sort of say is never stop running. I can't remember who told me this, but it's stuck with me ever since. I mean, the number of rejections that I've received over the course of my very, very small career is huge, but people only remember the things that you actually are accepted for. It's rarely talked about that your rejection numbers will be astronomical. And it is a numbers game. It's ultimately probabilistic. You need to apply for a lot of things. And when something pops up that seems left of field, it is always worth accepting it, or at least thinking about accepting it, because again, it might put you in a place where you're next to someone that'll give you a once in a career opportunity that you didn't even think was possible. Then I would also, this one comes from working with academics around the impact that they've achieved through their research. And this is that there is always more than one way to achieve change. Many of you will probably want to work, and this is just a guess, but you probably want to work in ways that are actually going to improve the planet. There are so many ways to do this, but quite often we only see the biggest organizations and we only think of the most walked paths. There are many and different ways, particularly in the emerging areas of sustainable enterprise, to go about building your own business and creating your own opportunity. And I would say, think about how many different ways there are, particularly if what you want to achieve, the businesses and the jobs and even the government departments that do not exist yet. And that is so often the case today. Now this advice I actually got from Alan DuPont. He said to me, he said, place yourself in a box before someone else does. And I was talking to him about how I was contemplating either doing a PhD in artificial intelligence or in synthetic biology, and I actually wanted to do both. And he said, look, if someone meets you and you're talking about all of these different sort of catchphrases, they are going to put you in a box, and it's probably going to be the wrong box. And so when you present yourself to people, particularly in these networking situations, place yourself in a box straight away that they will understand and that they will be able to interpret. And I think that goes to Merriden's point around that kind of adaptive flexibility. You do need to be your authentic self, but there's a way to, again, and this comes back to the online presence, curate that for the person that you're trying to engage with. I'd sort of finish up maybe with a kind of general point around don't sort of be afraid to want a job that doesn't exist yet. When I talk to people about the research that I do, unless they're an actual scientist, their eyes glaze over. There's probably less than 100 people who aren't scientists who have a good grasp of the area that I work in, but that's going to change dramatically across the next 20 years. And so I know that the job will exist, well, at least I'm taking a massive bet on it. And I think that is in the kind of disruptive age that we live in, many of the jobs that you want may not exist yet. And so it's either about you going out and creating them or putting yourself in a place that you'll be able to take that job when it is actually in existence. And this comes back to, I think, an idea about these career paths as probabilistic. I mean, listening to everyone else, so often there were chance events which then turned out to be instrumental in the way that their careers went. And when I've talked to academics, entire careers can hinge on being in the right room at the right time with the right people. And if you don't put yourself in that room, you'll never get that opportunity. And my takeout from that is that it's actually not about being in the right room at the right time with the right people. It's about putting yourself in enough rooms with enough people that that moment happens for you. And it's kind of trying to weight chance in your favor and being resilient to the fact that 20, 30, 40 of those rooms will never turn up anything for you. And the final point I would end on, and this is just a general one, is depending on what the kind of person you are and what you want to do, I would say don't ever allow yourself to be the most intelligent person in the room. I've stayed at Macquarie University for a very, very long time because I always feel like there is something to learn and there is something that is challenging me. If you're the most intelligent person in the room, and I cannot remember who said this, but the saying is that you need to leave and find a new room. And that would be the point that I'd end on. Thank you.
That is some very good advice. So many points there. I myself am writing down to remember for the future. I'll now invite all the panelists to turn on their cameras so that we can start asking some questions. So we have the first question is from Merv O'Keefe. Apologies if I mispronounce any names. And it's to Joshua, which is, how can you master the networking without coming off as pushy? Now, if any of the other panelists have some tips about this, I know Merriden already slightly addressed it, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question. Something that I had to learn the hard way. Got ghosted quite a lot. For me, it's as opposed to pushing a professionalistic kind of agenda, allowing the underlying passion and enthusiasm for what it is that you're applying for to shine through, and really rejuvenate or I suppose make your message to this person, this potential employer, whoever it may be, as authentic and exciting as possible. So it would be, the email would be the equivalent of like a kid in a candy store. Like, this is so exciting for me, and it's such a dream. Using a vernacular that that demonstrates a knowledge of the field with a passion for it. I think will suppress or subdue any thoughts of pushiness that the person on the receiving end may have.
Thanks, Joshua. Would any of the other panelists like to add any points on that question? No? Alrighty. So then the next question is from Madison, and this is to all of the panelists. Her question is, what are some skills or tips you've learned over time that school will never be able to teach you? Thom, go ahead.
I'm happy. I mean, I think I'm going to just be repeating what Merriden's already said, but to learn how to write. This is, it's so important. So my first degree was actually, I wanted to be a journalist as well. And the GFC happened. And so journalism jobs were not particularly around. But it meant that I had done, I'd read Strunk and White, which if you haven't read, then you need to go out and get that book. It's been in print, I think, for 70 or 80 years. Writing, many people think that it's something that you naturally acquire, that it's something that is a gift. It's not, it's a craft, and a craft can be learned. And that means you have to do it every day. And so I would recommend, it's one of those skills that in a text-driven age is probably the most important skill. And if people find out that you are a good writer, they will come to you for advice. And that's the position that you want to be in.
Great, thanks. Do Merriden or Jeremy, would you like to say something? Merriden, yep.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what school you, but one of the things I reckon, a tip that I learned at school was, well, the thing that I did learn was really worry about what you're going to do for your future. And the tip that I wish I had learned was, don't worry, it'll be okay. Like, if you don't get into the course, if you don't get into journalism, you're still going to be okay. In fact, you may well be better. So that was the thing that I wish that I hadn't learned at school, that I wish I did, that, don't stress about the next thing. Another opportunity will come out, as the point's been made, you'll have so many rejections. Don't worry about it, to move on to the next thing. That's
very true. And I think that's more relevant now than ever with the current employment statistics, that we are going to get knocked back quite a lot, and it's just continually trying, and something will turn up.
Can I just add to that note of rejection? Yes. I counted in the year that I was finishing studies, I applied for 89 jobs, and all in the health space industry. And there were a few that weren't. One was the DFAT graduate program. Didn't even get past the first stage. Yeah, so that's something I think school doesn't teach you, is how to deal with rejection very well. And I think that it also something else is that they don't prepare you for, is something that is like extremely pertinent, is how to trust your own instincts and to bend rules in a way that they can be bent, I should say, and you know, following protocol, sometimes not strictly to the letter, because that's what schools, you know, I think really try to enforce. There's an art there, but yeah.
I will add to the trust your instinct, because I do believe in that, but definitely don't just apply for one role that you think you're going to get. Apply to everything, because I made that mistake, but it's all good now. So our next question is for Merriden, and it's from Riley, who's asked, if you were going to hire a recent graduate into the Kpmg Geopolitics Hub, beyond the right degrees, what attributes or experiences would make a candidate stand out?
Well, this is a bit subjective too, isn't it? I mean, I guess it depends for every person who's hiring, you know, what they're looking for in a co-worker. But for me, you know, it's always things that demonstrate that a person can think more widely or sees the world in broader terms than just what this job requires. So it's one of those things, you know, when you're doing your first job applications, someone tells you that you to write, you know, I also enjoy bushwalking and hiking or something like that. But I want to see someone who's volunteering. I want to see someone who's taken 6 months off and traveled around South America by themselves with a backpack and their wits and nothing else. So for me, you know, to see someone who, because what that means is that you can think, that you can solve problems, that you can take a messy challenge and you can work it out, that you can prioritize, that you can use judgment, that you can survive in the wild. I want to see someone with the best marks, with exactly the right degree, and, you know, neatly combed hair. I want to see someone who's going to be able to solve issues from real life experience.
That's very valuable, I think. Some people definitely just fixate on that that mark and want to get the best possible one they can get, and, you know, it really is those life experiences that count so much. Our next question is from Kevin. It's quite long. He does thank all the panelists for their great stories and ideas. I'm going to make it a little bit more broad in terms of if any of the panelists have advice for when applying for jobs overseas, if you're not if you're an international, like a non-citizen of that country, and how you go about visa issues or, you know, getting the ability to work overseas.
I don't know about in terms of sort of national citizenship, but certainly when you're working for the UN, it doesn't matter what country you come from. And in fact, being a national from a non-developed country is an advantage in many cases to getting a role, because they want to encourage diversity and they want to encourage representation from underrepresented countries. So UN passport, a diplomatic passport, through that, it doesn't matter where you're from. But that's all I can speak to, I think.
Great, thanks. It's good to know there's options for everyone, I suppose. Again, this is for you, Merriden. Very popular, it seems. So this is from Laura, and she's asking, how could someone already in the workforce access more opportunities in international policy work?
I'm sure others would also have thoughts on this as well, but
yeah,
my thoughts would be volunteering, finding opportunities. You know, there's a lot of people who want to work in this space. In Australia, there should be more demand, but there isn't. There are a lot of volunteer organisations or charity, not-for-profit organisations, NGOs, that could do with person with workforce experience to come and help them. So that would be my first port of call, but I'd be interested to hear what others have to say about that too.
Yeah, I might just share a friend's story. I hope she doesn't worry about me sharing this, but she's Spanish and she moved to Australia a few years ago. And she moved to Australia with what I thought was the best job hunting technique I've ever seen. She emailed the Spanish Chamber of Commerce ahead of time and said, "Can I volunteer for you?" She landed with a voluntary job with the group that liaised with every single Spanish interested company in Australia. And she had a job within a month or two. And so the serendipity component, I think, is really important, but there are also ways to vastly enhance your ability. And there are network hubs that you can try. Like if you gravitate towards them, the chance for opportunities is so much higher.
I love
Induced
that.
serendipity. Induced serendipity.
That is a great story. What a good idea. Yeah, you should definitely get her to like write a story about that, because that's great. Alrighty. So the next question is to all the panelists from Merv, and it's, do you have tips in creating career paths specifically for international students in Australia? Might be a little bit more difficult to answer, seeing as none of you were international students, but if you have any advice on that.
And all I could do is pick up again on the, so I kicked around with the Spanish expat group in Sydney for a solid 2 to 3 years. And the thing that struck me so much about that community is how difficult they found it to get a job in Sydney, but also how supportive they were of each other. And so just sort of, I guess, picking up on Jeremy's point, the networks that you have access to that no one else has access to are often going to be the most profitable. And also the kind of job opportunities that you can potentially look for are going to be, I mean, I would call them arbitrage points. They're points where you can use the knowledge that you have that not many other Australians have and get the most value out of them. And so you're offering something that no one else does. And if there are businesses that are operating between the countries that you're familiar with, then they're going to be most likely to understand the value that you bring to them as an employee.
Great advice. All right, the next question is to Merriden. It's from an email, so I'm not sure of the name, but always interested in good books around writing. How did this Don Watson and the George Orwell book help your writing? By the way, which Orwell book were you recommended?
Okay, great. The George Orwell book, I just had a quick look to find it. It was a book that he wrote it was an essay he wrote in 1946, and it's called Politics and the English Language. And here's the phrase, the bit that I remember from it. Prose consists less and less of words chosen for the sake of their meaning and more of phrases tacked together like the sections of a prefabricated henhouse. And so that, and some of the things that Don Watson was saying in his book, they just basically eviscerate you for writing crap and for being lazy. And they make you think, oh yeah, that's a pile of, buzzword bingo that I've just put in a sentence. It looks amazing and dead set, super impressive, but it actually says nothing. And it's always a struggle as well, because you'll hear people in meetings or you'll read things and you're like, by jingo, I didn't understand a word of that. That must be very smart. And it's something that people do play up to, and people do, for one reason or another, they do it. And it's hard sometimes if you think, I'm just going to write simply so that people can understand it. I still, even now, if I just say something simple or write something simple, I think, well, that looks a bit easy to understand. Probably should try and make it sound smarter. But, I think that clarity, you want point across, then just get the point across. That's and stop wasting space with prefabricated henhouses.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to do. You always want to impress your superiors with your knowledge and your big words. It'd be a hard habit to get out of from university. So this question's from Mimi, and it's to everyone who's done a PhD, and she's asking whether you would recommend this, as she's considering this pathway as well as working full time. And if you could give a snapshot from your PhD journey and how you got there.
I'll take this, initially, but I'll speak from the perspective of of an administrator rather than a student. When I worked in with the Deputy Vice Chancellor Research, they looked after higher degree research management, and from that there are a few things that I would say. One is invest a lot of time in thinking about whether or not you actually need to do a PhD, and where and who you do it with. With a PhD, the supervisor is actually the most important aspect of whether or not you're going to have a fantastic time and what you're going to come out with. So picking them is really, really important. Depending on where you are in your study trajectory, if you've got a Master of Research or something similar, you might be eligible for a whole bunch of European universities. So don't confine your search to Australia. I could go on for quite some time, but I'm very happy to talk with you after about the specifics of how you do that, but it really does require a good deal of thought.
To be contradictory, I failed to give my PhD a deal of thought, and I really enjoyed it anyway. So, so the question that, so you've said, you know, would you recommend this pathway? It just depends on so many factors, right? Do you like learning? Because the thing about a PhD is that the process is as important as the result. In the end, you end up with a PhD, and people, I think, focus on the bit where you have a PhD, but you've got to spend a very long time doing the PhD, and it's a pretty transformative experience. So you've got to like learning. People say you've got to like your subject. In a way, you know, if you like learning, to some extent, your subject can be kind of changeable because you've got to like learning, and the subject will change. You don't spend 5 years looking at something without it changing slightly. So, I mean, my PhD journey, I applied for a PhD. I was rejected. There's the theme again. But then the person who got the PhD scholarship dropped out, and I got it. And I was so excited, you know, being the person who gets rejected and then gets it. I was so excited, and I just gave everything. Not in the first year. After the first year, I gave everything to doing it, and it was kind of on a topic that I kind of liked. But as it went along, I shaped it a bit more, and it changed because I couldn't actually go to Venezuela and I couldn't do something else. So it changed a little bit. But it's a highly, people sometimes take a long time, but I think to do it successfully, you have to be highly focused. You have to be highly dedicated. You have to be extremely well organized. And especially if you're juggling a job at the same time, you have to be amazingly self-motivated. And there are times when it's very lonely and very dark and cold, and you're losing your mind because you haven't done a fun thing for 6 weeks, and you're losing the ability to converse with other human beings. And you have to kind of be, I'm not joking, it's real. I'm just getting it back. So you have to love learning, and you have to want to go through that process, and you have to be sure that that's worth it for you, because it's a big commitment, and it's a profound experience. But God, it teaches you to research. God, it teaches you to think. It teaches you to write. It teaches you to take something huge and incoherent and make it into something, you know, with a flow, a narrative flow. You know, that's a skill that is, you know, still writing well, to take a whole lot of mess and make it into something linear. So I would recommend it, but it really depends on the individual.
Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight the negatives of it as well as the positives, to really know what you're getting yourself into. So important. So there's a question from Cosy, more in terms of wanting to get in contact with Thom, but so I would recommend finding Thom on LinkedIn and connecting with him. But then he does also add a question, and did you find it difficult linking your interest in hard sciences with international relations?
Still finding it incredibly difficult. It's interesting, it's not difficult in the way I thought it would be. I thought it would be difficult to talk with scientists about biosecurity and about the implications of what they're doing. They know, they fundamentally know the implications of what they're doing. It's actually bringing that back to international relations, which has been the difficult part for me, because that requires dealing with theoretical frameworks and constructs that in science you just don't need. If the experiment works, then it works. You don't need to have a theoretical framework to back it up. So that's been the difficulty for me.
Yeah, definitely. We are starting to run out a bit of time for questions. So any that we don't get to, I will be hopefully getting answers from the panelists, and then we'll post these on the AIIA social medias, so you'll be able to see them there. We probably have enough time for one more question. This is from Ruby, and directed more to Thom, but if anyone else has any points. She's interested to hear more about how you recommend that we exploit opportunities that don't necessarily exist yet, and how we can effectively fill these gaps.
Yeah, so I'd put it back to, I'm actually going to talk about someone who works in environmental science, actually, and they came up with a framework which is used by the Australian government to assess river health, but that's a 25-year process for them. And they say that it began in a room where someone said something and the three people decided that they could work together. I think it's about being in those rooms, and it's about being with people that you wouldn't normally associate with to a certain extent, because when you're with people that think completely differently to you, you're most likely to have ideas that sit at the margins of what other people imagine is possible. And it depends what kind of career trajectory you're trying to take, but it's that tenacity and resilience to rejection, which I think is a recurring theme. But then also not being afraid to take a risk on something that seems completely ludicrous.
If I can just add to the logistics of that really excellent question. I mentioned the position I'm currently in didn't exist. I'm the inaugural holder of it. During the year of volunteering leading up to the phone call that I received offering me this position out of the blue, I had been working towards making sure that I was positioned such that if a position in the future with the UNAA opened up, I would be optimally positioned for it. So that meant a finger in many pies in all portfolios. I tried to become a jack of all trades, absolutely master of none, but knowing as much about the association as possible, and making sure that the people who needed to hear that I was doing that got the message. So I would tell the director of volunteering that I'm doing this, director of peace and security, I just did this, let me know if you need anything. Continuing to let people know about your actions, because once you're in it, it gets a lot easier. So getting into a space where you can do that and keep individuals updated, primes. Yeah, I was primed. I was not really. I'm not aware of anyone else who had done the amount of work across the various portfolios that we have. So I tried my best to make myself the best candidate for the position that did not exist yet. I didn't know it was working. That's why I mentioned I was shocked. And when I had to get the phone call, I couldn't believe it. As Jeremy said, you were standing outside that shop. I was standing outside the bathroom of my apartment, and just like tell you the footprints of where I was standing. So it was still a shock, but it was great to know that it had worked. That my subconscious kind of, hey, I'm doing this. I'm here, still here. I'm here now. Look at me over here now. So yeah, that's just that final thought.
Yeah, and what a good thought to leave on, just trying to put yourself out there as much as possible, I think is a big takeaway from this evening. I'd like to thank, first of all, the panelists for giving up their Monday evening to give some advice to young professionals and students who are looking at a career in international relations. I'd like to thank all of those who have attended. I hope you've gained some valuable information that you can take forward. I certainly did. Might be trying to network later this evening. If any of the questions weren't answered, we'll be going back to the panelists to get some of their responses for that, and we'll be posting those on our social media accounts. AIIA New South Wales. We have recorded this event, so if you know of anyone who missed out on the event and would like to listen to it, we'll be also posting those, a YouTube link probably, to our social medias. Please keep in contact and connected with the Institute. We will be hopefully having more events like these in the future as we navigate our way through the virtual world.